It's nobody's favorite position. And oh, there's discussion. I stand, well, that's good. That's okay. So the issue for me was, oh yeah, totally. Yep. The issue for me was that the conversations all week, in fact, the whole month, have been so interesting that I wanted to respond to every single one in my talk. And so last night, actually, truthfully, this morning, I realized I had 75 slides and 45 minutes, and I had a really hard time narrowing it down. So I'm going to start a conversation about what I thought was least covered over the last month, and that to me seems like a lacuna, something that we should be talking about, and that is conversation. That is a kind of sociality that I think is really important. And in fact, this became abundantly clear when Sherry shared with us that wonderful New York Times article that language was made for communication and not reasoning. And in my mind was a huge duh, because it's not either or, first of all, of course. But there's communication and there's conversation. And we keep talking about sociality, but we're kind of talking about sociality the way social neuroscientists talked about sociality before hyperscanning was okay, which was how we perceive someone else's language or how we spit out language. And that to me is not sociality. So I'm going to take this big duh and point out that the first thing babies learn how to do, and Shiri mentioned this and Guillaume also, the first thing babies learn how to do is to converse, not to communicate information, but to converse. And in fact, there's been an argument, I'm not sure I believe all of it, but it's certainly a good straw man, that in evolution, language was developed for reasons of gossip and grooming. That is, that in order to engage others in a social network, we use language. And if we think about it, that's kind of the difference between conversation and communication. There we go. And it's important, I think, to all of us, because if you look around you, and this has been such a great example, I wished I had a baby cam or a baby view or any one of these diarization cameras mounted on my head, because we're doing exactly what I'm going to be talking about, which is interjecting or interleaving the communication of information and the conversation of building of social bonds. And if you didn't know it before, at the end of this month, you certainly know it, that we are social creatures, and no matter what we're doing, we have multiple goals in our conversations. We may be communicating information, but we're certainly also using language and our bodies to knit bonds. And what's interesting about this is we do it at work. We also do it at bus stops, in bakeries, or the grocery store when we're waiting to check out. And it has left me, I mean, I started working on this in 2007, but I still have these big major questions. How do we actually do it? What are the mechanisms of our body that allow us to do this? What are the neural mechanisms that underlie it? And I'm so glad that Guillaume brought up the kind of forbidden mechanism versus marker question that we all struggle with, the causality that all people who work with neuroscience struggle with. What is the developmental process? Strikingly, there is a lot of research on babies conversing, and a lot of research on adults, and virtually none on middle childhood. And to me, that seems like a terrible loss, because that's the age where children turn away from their parents towards their peers, and they're doing a tremendous amount of bonding with their peers, and we know very little about it. So what's the developmental curve? And are our AI systems that are increasingly better at communication also good at doing this multi-goal conversation that I would argue allows us to perform better in the communication goal of language? And if not, why not? So, if I just go backwards, how do we best understand and model both the biological, the neural, and also the comportemental, the behavioral dynamics of sociality and its impact on communication and its impact on the tasks that we engage in, that we interleave that sociality with. And can we build machines that do the same thing? And then how do kids do it? And how do they do it at 5, at 8, at 11, at 12? And how does that transfer to adulthood? So in my work, I have a checkered past. I've never been interested in the communication of information. All around me, people in language acquisition were studying how babies learn nouns, and I wanted to know how babies learned time. And that's what I did my master's on, using a Reichenbachian tense logic, and I did my PhD once again on children's acquisition of time and event, using hand gestures as data to round out what we knew about children's cognition and how time gets acquired. So I've kind of stayed away from communication, and I'm warning you about that because you're going to see that bias in what I talk about today. But in all of the work my students and I do, we model using AI systems that have certainly changed over the years since we started doing this, but we always start by simply sitting down and watching a lot of videos of people interacting. Adults, young children, children in middle childhood, people in all kinds of contexts. And we don't go, like many computer scientists, directly from that to building some kind of symbolic AI system. We first model it and we draw generalizations. We theorize about what we found. And it's those theories and hypotheses that allow us to build systems. And we use those systems sometimes as interventions, and you'll see some of the interventions, but also as models of the phenomena that we're interested in. And we use that to design efficient and effective evaluation models, which of course always lead us to realize that we didn't understand anything at all, and that we have to go back to the data to better understand what's going on. So over the years, we have collected data in as many ecologically valid or pseudo-ecologically valid contexts as we can. Graduate students talking about their PhD, children talking to their parents and talking to other children, real estate agents. We followed a real estate agent around for 6 months selling homes, because a real estate agent sells you the single most expensive thing you'll ever buy. And they use small talk with extraordinary precision to get you into the positions that they want you in at every given moment in that interaction and that transaction. And I knew this because the real estate agent we followed around was the one who sold me a house in Boston, far more expensive than what I could afford. And I got her back by videotaping her for 6 months. And we also increasingly use FNIR's apparatus, and I'm going to talk about that later, so that we can also look at what's going on in the brain while people are working on a task, while they're doing a task solo, while they're collaborating on a task, and while they're chatting. I'm going to show you some examples just so that you get a sense of the phenomena. You do it yourself, but it's often invisible to us. So these are 7-year-old children. They're interacting with the virtual peer who's behind that castle, but that's not what's relevant. What I want you to look at is the fact that they've been asked to tell a story with this toy castle, the two of them with the conversational agent, and you're going to see that they begin to tell that story, and then they get drawn into social bond building. This is the week for cute baby videos, isn't it? Cute children videos. I wish it was snowing, she says.
And then she came outside, and then she played outside, and then she played in the snow, and then what happened to your shoes?
What happened to your shoes?
And then she went back up to school, and then her shoes were all what's up.
Her shoes were all, oops, you don't need to watch that again. So she's just interjected a little language that has nothing to do with the story, but has a lot to do with her closeness to the other child and her, I don't know what's in her head, but what looks like her desire to involve the other child while she's doing this storytelling. Somewhat older, these are two 13-year-olds, and one is tutoring the other in algebra. And they've been tutoring for a little bit of time. And the tutor, they actually switch. So this is a situation that we've used a lot, where there's peer tutoring going on, where each kid gets a sheet of crib instructions about how to tutor a particular part of algebra. And one kid A tutors kid B, and then kid B tutors kid A. And so the tutor says, you can go ahead and get that first part done. And the tutee says, all right. And then the tutee breaks in with, I am like dead tired, and I have piano practice after this. And the tutor says, I have to go work at the zoo after this, and that's 5 hours long. Oh, really? Oh my God. Oh yeah. So, and it's usually me walking the entire thing multiple times for no reason. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, but I don't get paid. You don't get paid? No. So it's just volunteer work, sort of. It's like an intern. Next year in high school, I'll get paid. 14, does 14 go into the 14? No. 14 go into the 42? No. So we're going to have to make a really, really hard number. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So basically, x equals 42 over 14. That's negative. All right. And there is not a breath taken between the off-task talk and the task talk. And you can ask yourself why this kid breaks in with off-task talk. And in fact, my PhD student, Alafat Abulimiti, who defended his dissertation in December, modeled the use of what are called hedges and off-task talk, and was able to predict where those two different kinds of phenomena occurred and what their function was in these kinds of dialogues. So there we go. Now I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to show you two videos. So I've been talking about social bond building, but I operationalize this as rapport, where rapport is usually defined as a sense of harmony or ease of conversation with another person. Very simple. And I'm going to show you two videos of two teenagers who have just met each other for the first time, two dyads of teenagers. And I'm going to ask you to raise your left hand if the first dyad shows more rapport, and your right hand if the second dyad shows more rapport. Okay, so let's watch the first one.
Like 1 minute, it's like the easiest thing ever, like those graphs, and then like
just like small multiplication division stuff.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like it's coming out of this and not out of the
variables, you know.
Yeah, and I don't really understand most of it.
Let's see if we can get it to come out of speakers rather than out of my computer. Is he going to take a look at how the sound is coming out here? Let's see. I think it is.
Like 1 minute, it's like the easiest thing ever, like those graphs, and then like
Just like small multiplication division stuff.
yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like
Letters.
letters, variables,
Yeah, and I don't really understand most of it.
I mean, I understand this stuff, which is on my paper right now. I mean, I get that, but there's this weird transition in like the middle of algebra, like from algebra half to algebra 1, that is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really stressful for me.
Uh-huh. Like, don't like math.
Don't like math.
See, here's another 2 kids. Likewise, they've just met each other, exactly the same context.
Our school, as part of our math program, we do the Keystones just before high school. So
Nice.
I have to deal with it then. Just
Yeah.
Now.
It's good to get off your chest.
Factoring polynomials is really the only thing that I've lost after that time.
Yeah.
And overall, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, it makes sense to me, but it doesn't seem like you would use it that much. As
Yeah, you
opposed
could say
to geometry and algebra, were a lot more common. But factoring polynomials, that's all like stuff that doesn't really tangible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there like a verb for tangibleness? Tangate? Things don't tangate.
I have no clue.
Okay, that's probably all you need to see. So left hand, if the 2 kids, so neither of these dyads knew one another before they met here. Left hand, if the first dyad shows what you would call more rapport, and right hand if the second dyad does. Okay, left hand, put your left hand down. Yeah, nobody. So you all thought that the first dyad showed more rapport. That's the easy part. What did you see? Or what didn't you see, but what happened? It is the end of the day, so if I don't get you to participate, you're going to fall asleep. Yep.
There was more turn taking in the conversation and
Good.
alternation between speakers.
Great. More alternation between speakers. Yep. The second video, the kid on the left interrupted. Yep.
But also the content was different. Like the first pair were discussing their own feelings about it more, I felt, than the second a little bit, but it was more just sort of reviewing what they're doing.
More self-disclosure in the first one. Yep. Other things? Anything you noticed about their bodies?
Oh, well, I wasn't going to answer the body thing. But in the first one, there was an attempt to like fill in the information the other one was searching for, like the kind of finishing each other's sentences
Finishing
thing.
each other's sentences. Great. Yep.
Like in both of them, the person who was on the right was talking more, but in the second video, like the person who was on the left was doing mostly just like back channeling, whereas on the right one, it was like adding in things that were like, I guess, contributing to this conversation or adding like personal experiences as well. So it felt like it was more, I guess,
Good.
even.
So in both, the person on the right was talking more, but in the second one, the person on the left was just back channeling and not adding any content. Yeah, that's what most people see. It is culturally specific. And when I showed these videos in Japan, there was a generational difference where the younger people said exactly what you all said. And the older people said that it was the second video that showed more rapport. And when I asked them why, they said there was a lot more respect being shown because there was time left in between what one person said and what the other person said. So what's interesting about us is we all have bodies and we all use our bodies in conversation. We all have eyes and a nose and ears. Those things don't do so much in conversation. But we have heads that nods. We look left and right. And we all use those parts of our body, as well as our language, our prosody, the intonation, the lengthening, whether we speak at the same rate or one person speaks faster than the other. But in different cultures, what differs is the mapping between one and another, not the fact that we have bodies and how we use them, and not what we use them for, but that mapping between one and the second. So I just wanted you to get a sense of this before we go on, because we talk about these phenomena without, and we all do them, without really remembering what it feels like and what it looks like. And this is why, actually, when I was faculty at MIT, I had a student show up and I said, as I say to all my new students, you're now going to go watch videos on your first day. And this particular kid said, I am an engineer. I will do better if I don't have to look at people. And I said, that's great. Here's the VCR. Here's the tape. Come back out when you've watched the entire video. And he did actually amazing work and was transformed into someone. And we never come back from this. My students all say they've been changed forever. They can't go to cocktail parties without noticing what people do. You can ask Shiri. I've been staring at her all week long to her discomfort. So this is what all of my students do, no matter, and all of my employees do, no matter what position they have in the lab. And we use systems like Elan in order to annotate the nonverbal phenomena. We use Pratt to annotate the prosody, and we also transcribe the content, of course. So I told you what rapport looks like, and you yourselves found some of these devices in the videos. We also look at smiles. In fact, people, well, there's a lot of people in affective computing who tend to think that smiles manifest happiness, but actually most smiles in everyday conversation manifest discomfort or embarrassment. We use our eyes a lot to choose, if we're in multi-party conversation, to choose who we're talking to ratify the person who's the recipient of a particular utterance. And we use mutual eye gaze to manifest our interest in what the other person's saying, and to keep the conversation moving forward. And we synchronize our bodies. And actually, a postdoc and some of my master's students right now are working on modeling the relationship between personalities in groups of people and how that manifests itself in prosodic phenomena. In 3 languages, in Japanese, in French, and in Korean. And it turns out to be really interesting. We totally expected that in the groups where the personalities were the same, we'd see what's called alignment, where people start to talk at the same rate or they use the same pitch. And in fact, it was the opposite. We saw more alignment when there was a mixture of personalities. And we're still trying to untangle that and look at more data. And some of you, I think actually, Guillaume, you mentioned this earlier. Some of you may have seen this New York Times article, I think it was a year or 2 ago, that showed that you can stimulate particular parts of mouse brains and they become social. They stick to one another. They spend all their time together. So it's not just humans. If I go away with one thing from this month, it's that it's not just humans. If there's just one sentence that I would take away, I think we've all found this. And I said during the coffee break today that I feel like they're getting smarter. I don't think it's just researchers who are studying more. I think that the animals themselves are reading the papers and catching up. And as well as these non-conversational, qua-conversational phenomena, we also use particular linguistic devices, and we call those conversational strategies. This is something we find out by looking at the data and then coming up with hypotheses about what conversational strategies exist and then testing them against another data set. And they're things like what we call violation of social norms, teasing and insulting. In a paper around 10 years ago, we showed that when friends insult one another, they learn better together. These are teenagers, but adults do the same thing. I've been watching that. And when strangers insult one another, they learn less well together. And you'll see a model that shows that teasing is something that occurs at a later point in a relationship. Self-disclosure or negative self-disclosure. Teens are great at negative self-disclosures. We had one girl say, I love my pets, but my mom won't let me have any more because I kill them. Yeah, we were kind of shocked when we saw the video for that. Reference to shared experience, back channels, questions that elicit self-disclosure. Do you have pets? Yes, but I kill them. And praise, we have 5 instances of that in 48 dyads of teenagers. They don't praise each other a lot. And what we do, because it's fine to look at all these different devices, but how do we know that they model rapport? How do we know that they have anything to do with rapport? So what we do is we take the same videos that we've annotated, we divide them into 30-second slices, randomize the order of the slices, give 10 slices per annotator on Amazon Mechanical Turk, 10 slices from different videos, so they can't annotate the delta in rapport. They can just annotate the rapport from 1 to 7 in a 30-second slice. And then we reassemble those slices and we predict those using the verbal, nonverbal, and paraverbal prosodic phenomena that we've annotated. And we find all kinds of interesting things. So for example, hedges are super important. I kind of think you might want to add 5 to both sides. It turns out that peer tutors who don't have any training in tutoring, if rapport is low with their interlocutor, with the 2T, but they believe that they are good tutors, they use more hedges. I kind of think you might want to add 5 to both sides. And when they do, their 2T tries more problems and succeeds at more problems. So these kind of phenomena are successful in doing specific kinds of things. They have impact. And we also use temporal association algorithms because so many of these phenomena exist in time. And that's something else that has become more and more common in the talks over these weeks, is that we can't neglect the fact that these are dyadic phenomena. They involve 2 people, but they also take place over time. And one of the things that's been interesting to me over the, I guess, 15 years that I've been looking at this is that there's now a book called Dyadic Analyses, I think that's the name of it. There's more and more research on how to carry out temporal association algorithms of this kind so that we can predict events based on prior events, and so that we can look at the phenomena of 2 people at once. And I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. So as well as those temporal association algorithms, we also use model explanation algorithms such as SHAP, which allows us to find out which of these phenomena has the most weight in building rapport. So here we looked at individual phenomena and dyadic phenomena. So when the speech rate becomes similar, rapport is likely to be highest. And when the 2T is looking around, perhaps not surprisingly, rapport is likely to be lowest. And similarity of pitch also has a very large impact on rapport. So these dyadic phenomena, these things where they are converging, same speech rate, same pitch, have an outsized impact on rapport. And these are the kinds of things that allow us to develop models, both social science kinds of models such as this, that allow us to, on the basis of the literature and on the basis of our own work, to find what the median phenomena are that mediate between the devices themselves and rapport, things such as face management, politeness, or teasing, coordination, talking at the same time, or asking a question and then giving a response, attending to someone else, and so forth. And in fact, across all of these studies that we've done and across the studies in the literature, rapport has a really positive impact on performance. So you know this in stores. Storekeepers come up to you and say, "Are you having a good day? Tell me more." Waiters and waitresses inexplicably say, "What are we ordering today?" So these are all ways of creating a bond, and it is impactful. It has a positive impact, at least for them, on how much you buy and how much you spend. Physicians, when they build rapport, they enlist more patients in studies, in survey interviewing, and this is where it gets interesting. In survey interviewing, and we did a paper on this some time ago, it turns out that high rapport leads to more lying, and low rapport leads to less answering of questions. So you have to hit it in the sweet spot. Too much rapport, and the interviewee wants to do what she thinks you want her to do. And too little, she's just not interested in the survey. And we're going to come back to this because these kinds of phenomena are what have led me to wonder how we calculate the rapport, the rapport that is most impactful, most positively impactful on collaboration and on performance, and what the neural mechanisms are under these different kinds of rapport. We're going to do this very briefly, and then at the end, if we have time, I can talk about it more, about the kinds of things my students and I are doing, assessing how different LLMs do in managing rapport, mostly very, very badly. I think I took, yeah, no, I left it in, they still suck. Yeah, when I was writing this slide, that was the only word that came to mind. So they're getting better at communicating, but they have not gotten better at conversation. They take very long turns. They don't know how to do this quick back and forth that you noticed in the rapport videos. They don't know how to do what's called conversational grounding, where they assess the knowledge state of the listener and repair if they see that the other person hasn't understood. They don't know how to use hedges to make information less embarrassing, or something that the other person didn't know less embarrassing, and so forth. So they can communicate information, they can maintain coherence, but they don't engage in social bonding at the same time as they communicate information. And is that a question?
Yeah, if that's
Please.
Yeah, if I may, one question: how much of this do you think it's because it's vocal communication, things like interruptions and so on, versus text communication with like clearly defined turns?
Yeah, so some of this happens. I should have said at the beginning, what I'm interested in is face-to-face conversation or Zoom conversation, just because I find it the most interesting. But we do find a lot of it in text as well. So when we've looked at text, of course, people use emojis, and there's a fair amount of work in linguistics on the kinds of pragmatic phenomena that are carried by emojis. But we also use ... and various other kinds of devices to translate these particular kinds of social bonding phenomena into text. But for me, this is most interesting because there's so much. There's a body, there's a voice with its acoustic parameters, and there's the content of language.
So I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So have you used Duolingo lately? Duolingo uses large language models, and you can carry on a conversation. You can start the conversation. It will continue. Last night, Manuel had a conversation with Lydia, who was telling us about our dinner, wanting to know how we're doing. We went on for on and on and on, really interacting very quickly, very interesting. And then when we invited her to come, she said, well, too bad that she had to, another appointment, but went on for quite a while interactively. So I think some groups are using these large language models effectively for interactive communication.
Yep. And in fact, ChatGPT's most recent release claims that it does this, and it can manage maybe a turn or two, but not.
Well, Duolingo is using that for language. So it's really great. You can speak it to it in Spanish, it'll speak back, and it's not a lesson. It's a real conversation, interactive conversation.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, that's really interesting.
One more question.
Yeah.
Hi. So I come in with a little background in pragmatics. I'm thinking all of this in kind of the classic Gricean way.
Yeah.
And I think at the surface of it, at least, this idea of a rapport almost seems like a little paradoxical, right? They kind of violate relevance,
Don't
massively.
be prolix.
Yeah, and they give too much information in a manner whatsoever.
Right.
So, but at the same time, what the results that you presented in the last slide seems to suggest that this is not only not irrational discourse, but it actually kind of makes you kind of accomplish the ultimate, whatever the goal of the communication might be, right? So, like we can kind of agree that if a conversation is entirely no rapport, just entirely formal and task-driven, it might give you the impression of being like too rigid or less relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm just trying to think about this idea in relation to a couple of like classical pragmatic theory, like common ground or questions under discussion. So I was wondering, like, how would these like conversational strategies we've mentioned fit into these like higher level explanations of pragmatic theories?
So this is a kind of a long conversation, so we might want to carry some of it on after the talk. But we've done a lot of work trying to align speech acts with these conversational strategies, and we have never been able to do it. We've used damsel, so we've done damsel annotation, and it just doesn't line up. We've looked at various kinds of pragmatic theories, and the only theory that seems to be relevant, of course, is politeness theory, because a lot of these devices are either breaking politeness rules, so-called rules, in order to achieve particular goals, or following politeness rules. So I didn't talk about it here, but that this model, so there's actually there's rapport enhancement, rapport maintenance, and rapport destruction. I didn't have room, so I didn't put rapport destruction. I actually find that to be the most interesting because it's exactly the same devices used at the wrong time. So we are polite in the beginning of a relationship, but if you go home tonight and you say, "Hi, honey, how are you? How was your day? Did anything interesting happen?" Your spouse, your partner, is going to get really worried because that's not the kind of device that you can use late in a relationship. It only works early in a relationship. So once again, this is one of the reasons why time is so important in something like this. But politeness theory captures some of that. But if you're interested in more about this, the researcher in pragmatic, well, of course, Brown and Levinson, but also Spencer Odie has written really good work on the interaction between pragmatics and conversational strategies. She doesn't call them that, but she does talk about rapport. Yeah. So, yeah. So if you look at some of the systems that are trying to do this, and this is particularly interesting to me because so many of these devices have kind of figured out that they should be taking into account the interlocutor, that there should be some of what we call audience design. They often think that there has to be emotion, although I think they wouldn't know what emotion was if it hit them on the head. But they do try, and you can see things like this. Should I go to bed, Siri? I think you should sleep on it. I love you, that's nice. Can we get back to work now? So this is, of course, rule-based. It's entirely rule-based. It's rigid. And it knows how to punt when it needs to punt. Tay and Xiao Ice similarly supposedly have something called an empathy module, but once again, it's quite rigid. And it's not short utterances. It doesn't take into account any of the knowledge state of the interlocutor. And of course, and I think, was it Noah or Mike who showed this? Most recently, oops, no, that's another system. There we go. In the New York Times, there was this terrifying interaction between Sydney, the ChatGPT, oh no, it's not ChatGPT, it's Bing, agent, and the New York Times journalist, where it told him to run away with it, and that it loved him, and that they were meant to be together. It's pretty terrifying. And I recommend that you take a look at it. This is hallucination to the nth degree. It clearly knows that it's supposed to engage socially, but it doesn't know how. It's kind of like a little kid telling a joke who knows that a joke is a thing, but doesn't actually know how to build a joke. It knows that social is a thing, but it doesn't know how to build social. And as I said, if we have time at the end, I'm happy to talk about the kinds of things we've been looking at in which LLMs are capable of doing these kinds of phenomena and why we think that that is and what to do about it. But in much of the work that we've done, we've built predictive models, but we've interleaved them with symbolic systems. So for example, this is an architecture, a socially aware architecture. It looks like 90% of the dialogue systems architecture that you find in the field of dialogue systems, except for 3 modules that we built. One is a rapport estimator that has high correctness in automatically annotating the conversational strategies that I showed you. It has a conversational strategy, a rapport estimator that uses the language of the agent and the language of the interlocutor together, so dyadically, to assess the level of rapport at every given moment and to update that every 30 seconds. And then to take that into account in a module that we call the social reasoner, And in this architecture, the social reasoner is separate from the usual dialogue system reasoner. But it's one of the things that we're thinking about is how we make those into one. We don't have a social reasoner and a reasoner, and one happens before the other. We don't translate language into something that's more polite or something that's more teasing. But at this point, we had a social reasoner that was separate, and it took input from the nonverbal behavior, the paraverbal behavior, and the conversational strategies, and it used that rapport estimator to assess where it was and to try and maintain rapport at a high level across the dialogue. And interestingly, although it doesn't seem to be in the next slide where I thought it was going to be, and these are some of the other agents that we've built over the years. We used that architecture, so weirdly enough, the World Economic Forum asked us to build an agent who could talk to world leaders at Davos and recommend to them people who were at their level and would be interesting for them to meet, and sessions that would be interesting for them to attend. So we had access to the database of all the attendees. We had access to what sessions they had gone to in the past. That's kind of, our knowledge base. And then we built this system, and more than 300 world leaders used it. More than 100 world leaders came back for second and third conversations. And one of the World Economic Forum employees told me that he thought Sarah was beginning to like him, which was weird. He came back 5 or 6 times, but she never ran away with him. It must have been such a disappointment to him. Anyway, so it assessed the level of rapport at any given level. It used that conversational strategy classifier. It used off-the-shelf, well, kind of off-the-shelf, open face from Carnegie Mellon to track facial movements and to put those into the mix. And then from that, it decided what it should generate at any given moment, and it translated that into language and into nonverbal behavior. And I'm not going to show you the video, but it was pretty funny. More interestingly, in terms of science, we've also built systems on the basis of these models that we've used with children and that we've used with teenagers. And that's going to bring me to the next part where I get to talk to you about rapport going over the top, working and not working, and who it works for and who it doesn't work for. And I'm going to show you this interaction. So this actually was a study that was about a totally different thing. We were looking at dialect in schools in the US. And in particular, so we had looked at Hispanic English and African American English. This study is on African American vernacular English. And we were interested in how teachers treat kids using this dialect in the classroom, and what would happen if they worked with an agent that spoke their same dialect. We got thrown out of school after school, I should mention in passing. And this is an interaction between one of the kids and the agent. Let me play that for you.
I actually think it has to be low, because if it has to, because what do you think? Is it going to be higher or low?
Well, maybe we should make it lower so it has less room to wiggle around.
You took my idea, Alex. That was my idea because I
Nuh-uh.
Yes, it was.
Wonderful thing about working with kids, you can give them a blick and they're fine. They know there's lots of things they don't know. They don't know what taxes are. Blick is the same thing. They don't know what a virtual agent is. Fine, they just add it to the things in the world they've just learned about. So they're totally fine in interacting with this agent who we told them was a virtual child that they were going to work with on a science experiment. And the PhD student who was doing her thesis on this brought her work to group meeting, and one of the other students convinced her to have the videos annotated on Amazon Mechanical Turk using this same method that we always use. And in fact, it turned out that the kids who, I forgot to tell you the conditions. So originally there was all African American vernacular English, code switching African Av for brainstorming, and then mainstream school English when they practiced a presentation for the teacher, or all mainstream English. But likewise, the agent halfway through said, my teacher likes it when I use my school English. Let's practice our presentation in school English. So identical. Teachers wouldn't let us use the all AV version. So we ended up with 2 versions. And it turns out that the kids learned more science when they brainstormed in African American vernacular English and then switched to mainstream English. But in fact, that the result was due to the fact it was mediated by rapport, that they felt more rapport, or more rapport was demonstrated in the videos when they were interacting with an agent who spoke the same dialect with them. And what was nice for us was that this was particularly strong for low achieving students. Now this is, and you'll notice that none of these agents are in the slide, they're not Final Fantasy, they are not photorealistic, and that's on purpose. We don't want any kid to get confused, and I get asked this all the time, aren't you going to confuse kids? They're going to think that this is a real person. None of them think it's a real person, but just in case, we make these non-photorealistic. Interesting, there's another. That should not be there. Just look at the one on the right. They're non-photorealistic, and this is an agent that's working on math with this kid who you can maybe tell by her facial expression is particularly worried about being told she has to work on math because she's not good at it. Oops. And then this is a part where they start working on math together.
Hi, I'm Jaden. What's your name?
I'm Sasha.
It's nice to meet you.
You as well.
So what school do you go to?
I go to Ellis.
Oh cool, I go to Pa Cyber School.
Cool.
What grades are you in?
I'm in 7th.
Cool, me too.
Cool.
What do you do for fun?
I like to draw. What about you?
I like playing robot soccer.
Those are the things that allow us to stay up late nights or stupid jokes. And similarly, I'm not going to play you the math part, but they do math, and well, actually, I'll play you a minute of it.
Nope, that's not quite right. Don't worry, I think these are hard too.
That's okay. Negative self-disclosure and hedging.
+9. Oh, 50.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
So what do you think you should do next?
I will divide by 10, and that'll get me X.
You get the idea. Now, there's something interesting about this, which is that when we looked at the results of kids using this, we found something that we didn't expect at all. So we had kids do a pre-test and a post-test. We had them self-rate rapport. But what we found was that the kids who were bad at math, who were less strong in math, learned most with a version of the agent that did task only. And the kids who were good at math, who had higher delta, or who had high pretests, did better when there was both rapport building and math. And you can tell me why you think that might be the case, but it really brought me back to this study about survey interviewing and to asking myself when rapport is useful and when it shades into off-task talk that doesn't let you go back to the performance. Is that a question? No. Okay. And I want to know more about that. And when I just started looking through videos, my sense was that there might be some kind of alignment phenomena going on that would allow us to predict when off-task talk is positively impactful on task performance and when it's not useful on task performance. And if we're going to build these agents for education, we need to know that. And in and of itself, it's a really interesting question. And what we decided, was that, I think I was going to just tell you that we've also built versions of these agents that we've used with children with autism, but we did a kind of a funny thing. We had the children interact with the agent, but we also built a version that they could control. And there was a kid in the next room interacting with it, and the target child controlled the virtual agent and controlled its behaviors, and then over the course of 6 weeks, recorded behaviors for the agent into the control panel and so forth. And they ended up using more of these contingent behaviors, in particular contingency, with real children after the end of the experiment. Okay, but this led me to start thinking more about the neural mechanisms underlying sociality. And I had done an experiment with Joan Chow at Northwestern in 2007. And the point of the experiment was to look at children with autism ultimately, and whether they found it easier to interact with agents than with people, and what the neural mechanisms underlying that might be. And we abandoned that because it was an MRI-based experiment, and even getting typically developing children into that machine was very, very hard. And so fast forward a very long time, and we started thinking about hyperscanning technology, and in part this was thanks to the work that Guillaume has done, which is extremely interesting. We discovered that there had been a fair amount of work, including work by Guillaume and his colleagues, on parent-child interaction, both mother-child and father-child interaction. And as he said, there's more interbrain synchrony when the child interacts with the parent than when the child interacts with the stranger. But there had been no research done on child-child interaction. And so it seemed to us, whether it was marker or mechanism, that it would be interesting to look at children engaging with their peers under a hyperscanning protocol and trying to understand whether we could predict interbrain synchrony based on the verbal and nonverbal behaviors that they engaged in that built rapport. So it's too many kinds of data, and it's extremely complicated, but we started doing it anyway. And one of the things that we discovered when we looked at the literature was that there is a fair amount of literature on collaboration. Uri, some of this literature is by you, showing that in some cases, there is higher interbrain synchrony when people collaborate well. And in some instances, there is lower interbrain synchrony when people collaborate well. And this also seemed like a reason to continue forward with this experiment. And so this is what we're starting now. It's, as I said, a super complicated experiment. We're using FNIRS because it's more resistant to children's movement. And we're having children engage in a task. There, this is what it looks like. We did a pilot where we had them play, I think it's called Who Is It or Who Am I, the Disney game. Some of you are of the age that you played this, where there are things that you knock over, you have to guess who the other person is. Anyway, we did that. We found that there was higher interbrain synchrony when they were collaborating than when they were doing the task solo. And so we've developed this paradigm that, in fact, Samantha used for her thesis, the work that you saw on dialect, where children will be working on a science task, and each science task takes 2 weeks. They'll work on it solo, they'll work on it together, and they'll do the next one solo and the next one together and the last one solo and the next one together with the same child over the course of 6 weeks. And we will be videotaping and audio taping and looking at these massive streams of data to see if we can better understand what the correlation and predictive value is of these behaviors and what the predictive value is of the level of rapport. So it's kind of crazy, and I think, Shiri, was it you who said that we say risky things up here? Yeah, so this is my risky thing because we're totally struggling with this. Actually, we're struggling with finding children in France because no one wants to let their child anywhere near a device that they have to wear on their head. And it turns out that to get into schools, we need a letter from the Minister of Education. And I managed to get an appointment. We had a great meeting. She said, come back, I'm going to introduce you to the Scientific Commission. And I wrote yesterday and said, I can't wait to meet the Scientific Commission. And she said, given what's happening in France, everything is on hold. If you haven't followed the press on what's happening in France, even the Minister of Education is affected by this. But it's got lots of, nothing as difficult as what you're doing, Uri, so I should feel good about this, I guess. But it's got lots of difficult things about it in terms of running the experiment. And then I think it's going to be complicated to analyze the data, but I am super excited about it and ready to be risky in the hopes that you will give me input into the task and into how to analyze it. And I'm just going to skip to the end and say, so what I've shown you is, I've shown you how people interact with other people and the ways in which we interject and interleave social and task. I've shown you that that social, even though it doesn't follow the Gricean maxim be as brief as you can, both seems to be important to people and also seems to be useful to people in a variety of tasks. And that given that, it's important to know when that off-task talk, when that social bonding is helpful. I didn't mention this, but it's helpful in and of itself. We know that people who have weak ties, older people who have weak ties to the people in their neighborhood, get sick less often and live longer. So social bonding in and of itself is useful. I'm not saying that it's ever not useful, but when is it useful for task performance? How do we understand that? How do we build agents that can engage in contexts such as education, where managing both the social, which is so important, and the task could help children learn, especially perhaps low achieving kids, but we have to do it right because sometimes rapport works and sometimes it's counterproductive. And I'll stop there and I'm just gonna show you a slide because I get asked this so often and I thought this would be an interesting audience to show it to. I get told, actually in 2000, when we built the very first virtual child, I had a paper accepted at SIGGRAPH, which I was super excited about. Total tenure maker. I showed up and then I was on a panel and this guy raised his hand and he said, "Justine, you are evil." And I thought, I'm pre-tenure. I had a very short career, but it was an exciting career. I went back home. Someone said, "Evil is better than mediocre. You should take this as a compliment." I tried to keep that in my mind. But still today, a very long time later, 24 years later, especially in France, where technology is really mostly scary to people and not interesting to everyday people, I get asked whether what I'm building is evil. And so in the most recent talks, I've been finding toys that say "I love you" to children and asking if they are evil as agents that say "I love you." So I'll leave you with that, and I'll leave you with my motto these days, which is, I'm not building human-like technologies because I'm interested in building humans or I'm interested in making something as human as possible. But I am interested in building technologies that allow us to be as human as possible and allow us to lead the most fulfilling lives we can. So thank you.
This is so interesting, Justine, and connected to the infant work in really interesting ways. And just a thought that kind of echoes the point about pragmatics is this seems to be a sort of cue that we're not in a utility relationship. And I wonder if that might be part of thinking about caregiving, for example, right? Like these rapport signals are exactly the signals in infancy and in adulthood that could tell you this is going to be a care relationship, right? This is an intimate local relationship, and it's one where you could expect care rather than expecting, say, contractual or reciprocal interaction.
I think that's really interesting, and it sounds really apt. At one point, we did a deep dive into teasing and insults.
Yeah.
And the sense that we had looking at the data was that this was a way of marking your relationship as special.
Right.
You could violate social norms because you lived outside of social norms.
Right.
And that, in fact, if we look at this in terms of time, you begin with politeness by adhering to social norms. And over the course of time, you manifest the fact that you have changed the nature of that relationship. And it's cool to know that babies are getting this same kind of sense. Yeah, I want to know more about that.
Okay, thank you, Justine. It was a great talk.
Thank you.